Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So
Take it away. We've made it. Round 2. Ding, ding, ding. Ev, thanks for joining me again. And yes, between the two of us, we are working out the technical challenges of the new streaming world across multiple different platforms and connecting multiple different streaming devices across planets, countries, oceans, and crossing borders, boundaries, and making the magic happen. And it's a challenge, but we're getting there. We're getting there. We are getting there. So thanks. Apparently, this is our round 2.
This is our round 2, and I'm super excited because it gives us a chance to include some of Stand Up Journal's viewers who have been sending in questions to you regarding either the film Last Known Coordinates or just the crossing in general. So thanks, Chris, for giving us a chance to actually, have that kind of interaction with our viewers, because I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and it's really unique, and it sounded like there were a lot of people that sent in some really cool questions. So I'm really excited to hear what they've got to ask and what they found fascinating, interesting, and insightful, and what intrigued them, I guess, because when you're so involved from every level, you don't see the wood from the trees, like I've said before. So sometimes it's nice to be able to get external people's input and perspective, because it really gives you an understanding of what people found fascinating and what people battled to understand, and what questions that people had, which sometimes I just think are normal. Like, I don't think about them.
Chris Bertish, there is nothing normal.
Evelyn, yes, you're 100% correct. I do seem to hear that as quite a consistent thread through my life.
Yeah.
It's not shocking, but yes. But thanks for having me. And I know that it was everybody's the feedback from the film, and everybody that's watched it has been amazing. And we managed to get to number 1 on iTunes downloads in South Africa, and I think top 12 in the States, or global, which is actually amazing. I think we've dropped down to like 20 or something at the moment, but I think the feedback's been really amazing. The feedback that you've got from readers and from people out there, has it been really positive?
Super positive. And I think, as you and I spoke about before, it's really good timing. I know that you've had to delay the release of the film for about a year due to COVID upset and sort of the way that you wanted to release it in a new format.
Yeah.
However, after a year and a half of sort of the chaos the world has been going through, it's really good timing to have such an inspirational film drop and be accessible across multiple platforms, right? Like, so you don't have to go to a theater or a film festival, but you can, bring it right into your own home and not only experience, that journey that you took, but also to be uplifted by it. And at this stage in the game, the feedback I'm getting is that people are grateful. They're like, finally, we've wanted to hear this story for, a few years now, and here it is. And it's just that kind of strength, resilience, and motivation that people are looking for, just to apply back to their own daily lives. In our first interview, you spoke so eloquently about everyone has their own oceans to cross. And that really does seem to be the resounding truth that I'm getting from our readers and the people who are viewing the film on the streaming platforms. So, although, everything works out the way that it should, although it's not released when you originally planned, in the end, I think everything works out perfectly. So, bravo on the release of the film. Nice. I know how much work it took for you to put that together and finally bring it to fruition. And the feedback that I've heard is nothing short of great. Although there are interesting questions, you may be challenged a little bit.
You know what the amazing thing is? I'm really looking forward to be challenged, because I've through the last sort of 3 or 4 years of doing a lot of different. I've got probably 2 or 3 different talks that I do on this journey to audiences all over the world and big companies. But I get asked pretty much every single question that you can possibly imagine. So it's really interesting to always see if there's some really different questions and things that are very unique that come up that people find fascinating, that really test me, which is really great, because you get asked quite a lot of the same kind of things. And I think it's really nice when you actually get people that have really thought about it. And I think the film gives a little bit more of an insight than a lot of people's just their basic perspective of it by reading the captain's logs. And it gives them a little bit more of a deep dive into the experience, where I think my objective with the film is to try and take the reader along on the journey with me. And that's why it's so raw and so real and so powerful, because it's literally me in the moment, like with a GoPro, like filming everything. And I think that's, that's what makes this story I think it makes it very powerful. And I hope that sort of came across in the film, because, we've been so like brainwashed by society and Hollywood and stuff, where they make everything look so real and so intense, but it's all studio produced and Hollywood, glitz and glam and special effects and everything else. And this is like, there's none of that. It's just so raw and so real and in the moment, and so in the space of this, which is very unique to capture. And I hope that sort of comes across in the film and comes across to the audience in that way, where they grasp that, and they grasp the fact that, like, I'm literally sometimes just trying to hang on to any sort of positive thread and trying to stay alive and just trying to get through these situations. But I'm still trying to film and being mindful of the fact that I'm wanting to take people along on this journey with me, no matter how long it would take after that point, if I survived, to be able to make the film, to tell the story, that would have that footage to be able to bring them into that space with me and take them on that journey somehow, on the adventure. And I think at the moment, as we're talking about, the world needs hope, and it needs courage, and it needs inspiration. And I think I believe that there's a hero in every single one of us. And, sometimes it just takes a little spark and a catalyst just to bring that out. And it doesn't mean you have to, go and paddle across an ocean. It just means, like, everybody's got their own version of that, as we were talking about. Everybody's got their own oceans across. It can be a 5K, a 3-mile run. It can be a 10-mile sup. It can be supping across the lagoon. Like, everybody's got their own goal, and that, like, be a hero. Like, it's not that hard to be a hero. I believe that there is a hero in every single one of us. And when I say that, like, everybody's idea of a hero is this, like, amazing character that does these incredible things. But my definition of a hero is just being a really good role model to other people. And that can be to anyone. That can be to your kid, to your partner, to your community, to your family, to your friends. And I think it's just hopefully the film, in a way, it just shows up in a narrative that speaks to people to say, I can be better. Maybe I can be better. How can I be a better human? And I'm going to, I'm going to try. I'm going to go out and do an adventure. I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to give back. I'm going to help someone else. I'm going to lift someone else up. That's what it's meant to do. It's like, yes, it's about courage and planning and preparation and resilience and all that inspiration, but it is also about, like, being a catalyst for positive change in whatever way, about how we can all be better and do better for humanity.
I think you absolutely captured that, not just through the GoPro footage of your crossing, but also through how the film portrays your relationships with the other people in your life, and just how much what you accomplished or what you did impacted the people around you, right? I mean, just from, your brothers to your wife to Jeff Clark and, the people on shore when you arrived in Antigua, all of that, right? And I do hear you loud and clear about everybody has the ability to have that kind of positive impact on the people around them, right? And it doesn't have to be quite as extreme as what you do, but we can choose.
Yeah.
Right? We choose a day at a time how we're going to show up in the world, and how are we going to be sit back and be complacent and expect things to come to us, or are we going to stand forward and move into something that might feel a little bit scary? And I love those conversations that you and I have had about, I call it fear, you call it something else, but just being able to lean in those moments, because you've done the preparation, you've done the work previous to taking on something that maybe before you didn't even dream was possible.
Yeah.
So, I loved all that you said. And just real briefly, Chris, I'd love to hear you speak just for a moment on those talks that you give to the corporations and schools, because I don't think Stand-Up Journal's viewers know about those. And I think they're wildly interesting to hear about. So who do you talk to? How do people contact you about that? Okay. And what do you talk about?
Thanks, Ava. That's a really great question. I appreciate that. Yeah, so through the Chris Bertish Foundation, which is my nonprofit, I do a lot of stuff for schools and for education, and the stuff for the younger youth, as in sort of like 10 to 17, is really, it's empowering. It's empowering and inspiring kids to believe in themselves and what's possible, but it's also about believing that we all are enough and we all can do anything if we set our mind to it. And there are no excuses. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what background you have, whether you have abilities, disabilities, whether you've been compromised mentally, physically, you're handicapped. It doesn't matter. It's about your will to succeed and your will to overcome and your will to achieve anything you set your mind to achieve, and how you do that. And then I tell that as I just use my story as a narrative to tell that tale. And I have a lot of very empowering and inspiring stories in my arsenal and toolbox, of coming from Africa and being completely unsponsored and unsupported, and becoming one of the best big wave riders in the world, and then competing on the world stage and winning multiple big international awards and some of the biggest event in big wave surfing history. Ended up on borrowed equipment after flying for 42 hours, and it's just against the world's best in the biggest waves in the history of ever big wave surfing, paddle and surfing. So like, that was just like one stepping stone, but it just showed that like I was still working a full-time job, and I was training before work and after work, and was paying for everything myself, and I was doing fundraisers and everything else to be able to make it happen. And you're competing against the best, athletes on the entire planet. And, I think it's a great example of how badly you want something. And I believe that if you want something badly enough, then you'll find a way. If you believe in it with every fiber in your being and you're prepared to put in the work, and it's not easy and it's not pleasant and it's hard, and the hours, just the amount of sacrifice that you make in order to be able to do that and make that happen, and to show up at your best when no one's watching, and that's, I think, the difference between the best and the rest. Like, you don't have to go to the gym and pump iron and like, oh, look at me, I'm going here to the gym twice a day. No, it's like, it's when the lights are out, when there's no one around, like, what are you doing then? Like, how are you showing up to be able to get prepared for moving forward into that space and to achieve whatever you wanted to do in life? And I think from the surfing side into the stand-up paddleboard side into the public speaking side, public speaking was my greatest fear. A lot of people don't know that, but I used to do everything in my power all my life to avoid speaking in front of an audience. And like I've learned through big wave surfing and a lot of the other sports that I've had to transcend, is bending fear to your will and making it your friend. And when you do that, then you realize when you realize it's just an emotion like everything else, then you can manipulate it and bend it to your will. And then you can use it as the most powerful tool to be able to help you instead of hinder you. And when you can do that and you can see that, and then you keep on tackling your fears head on, when you do that and you have a positive result and you're like, oh, when I did that, actually, even though I was terrified of doing it, when I did it, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And then I actually had a really positive result. And then the more I did it, the less that I feared it, and the easier it became, and the less I worried about it. And every time I had really fantastic results. So if you use that as a reinforcing feedback loop, then you'll realize that every single time you fear something, one, you got to remind yourself that the fear actually isn't real. It's within your own mental space, and you have the ability to be able to control it. And then 2, utilize that fear and the things that fear do for you to actually be able to enhance your focus and help you actually transcend what you want to do and get amazing results. And then remind yourself about that feedback loop about every single time I challenge myself, every time I face my fear, like I get amazing results. So I got to keep on doing that, because that's where I learn and I grow the most, and where I become a better version of myself. And I think if a lot of people realize that, there'd be, they would do so much more, and they would tap into so much more of themselves, and they would not limit themselves of what they can do and all the things that they've dreamed of doing that they suppress because they're scared or they're fearful of failure or what will people say? And as we've spoken about before, I don't believe in failure. I only believe in the failure of not trying. And when you try something, you don't focus on whether you're successful or not. Just focus on trying something, learning, and becoming better until you get to a point where you see, like, wow, that's amazing. That's what I wanted to achieve. All the other times, whether you got to that point in the first time round or the second or third or fifth time round, it doesn't really matter. It's just stepping stones to getting to your goal that you want to. It doesn't mean you've failed at all. It just means all you're doing is just building. And if most people saw not succeeding as building towards success, then there would be no such thing as failure. You would just be trying, learning, and evolving and growing. And that's the definition of success for me, as far as I'm concerned, because then you never fail. You only just, all you're doing is you're trying to get to a target and a goal, and you're always going to get there. You're just building along the way. And every time you build, sometimes you go back down and you're like, oh, take out that building block, replace it with another one. Oh, that one worked better. Okay, cool. Building until you get to your pinnacle of your pyramid, which is where your Elysium and your goal lies at the top, and a little magic fountain of light.
So, I mean, it's such a great conversation. You just said so much there. But what I do want to sort of draw back to is I think a lot of viewers don't understand that your entire life experience sort of led you to creating this transatlantic subcrossing. That it wasn't like you became a stand-up paddler one day and did some training and then paddled across the ocean. It had everything to do with your entire waterman history.
Correct.
That led you to that ability to make it. And if people haven't read Chris's book, Stoked, yet, it's called Stoked with an exclamation point by Chris Bertish. It really gives a good background of where you come from in terms of growing up in South Africa and some of the gnarliest waters on the planet, and being motivated by certainly your father, and then keeping up with your brothers and surfing and spending time in the water, with that tribe, to the point where you become a big wave surfer. And then even beyond that, when you got ready for your transatlantic subcrossing, you spent time breaking world records on, I think it was distance, right? Or time, or distance in terms of
distance and time.
Yeah, distance and time. So getting comfortable in the water under so many different conditions. And then also, which I always found fascinating, is that you've crossed the Atlantic, I don't know how many times, as a yachtsman, right?
Yeah, as a sailor, for sure.
Yeah, so I think, all of that is so relevant to this conversation, because in order to achieve a goal like crossing the Atlantic Ocean on a stand-up paddleboard, there was a lifetime of experience that came before that. And it all just sort of came to a pinnacle.
Correct.
That allowed you to point that forward in the direction of paddling 4,050 nautical miles.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, Evan. I think you're right. Like, most people don't know that. And I was just doing a whole TV show segment that they're doing on the film and everything else last week, and the whole film crew came up to Langebaan and was filming there, and we were going through a whole lot of stuff. And then they asked me to send them a whole lot of B-roll footage, and I was going through a whole lot of B-roll that I had to send them for that they're putting together. And I found this one clip that I haven't seen before, and it was just me out in Langebaan, and I'm up at the top of the lagoon, which is about, I don't know, 15, 18 miles up the top of the lagoon. The wind's like 20 to 25 knots. And I'm talking about my training, and I'm like, this is, I've been I worked until like 2:00 this morning on trying to put together the logistics. We're about 3 months away. I don't think people realize like how much goes into this kind of project. And then, I was up at 7 this morning. I went for a paddle, but this is to just give you an idea of like how I train. And I've done my 15 miles upwinder, and which has taken me 5 hours or whatever. And as you can see, and I look down, I've got like all my gear on my 17-foot SIC Bullet that I used to train on, where I used to like strap on like weighted gear, like as if I had, I don't know, 50 to 60 pounds, 60 pounds roughly. I worked it out, like roughly 60 to 65 pounds that I'd strap on the front, and then I'd paddle into 15 to 25 knots for 4 hours, do a 15-mile upwinder. And my reward was to do the 15-mile downwinder afterwards, and that would be my treat. Like, yes, okay, you want your treat? Then that's what you got to do. You got to do 4 hours upwind, which puts about 3 to 4 times more load on your body to go into those conditions, over and above strapping on an extra 60, pounds of weight just for kicks, because that helps you training to do what you do. And there's no one around. No one saw me. There wasn't like a post that I did on it afterwards to like say, oh, this is what I've just done. Like people had no idea. People didn't see me training at night, leaving at 11 o'clock at night and coming back at 3 o'clock in the morning, to get familiar with being alone paddling at night in ocean environment. No one saw that either, and I think that's what I think people miss. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of that kind of footage in there, but I think like you understand, because you've known my journey and you followed my journey, and you've got a lot more insights into it than most people are aware. But I think most people just have no context of like, if you want to do something like that, find out what the human did beforehand that got them to the point that allowed them to be comfortable to do that, and not only survive, but when things got really hairy and scary, that most people would be like, oh my God, this is crazy, I'm going to give up or whatever. Like I was used to that, because I was dealing with that environment, and I was training myself to be comfortable in an environment that no one else was comfortable in and had ever experienced before. And I was doing everything in my power to try and mimic those experiences and those environments for like 6 months beforehand. And that's, I think, what really helped me to get through the difficult times, besides my background across all the different, ocean environments, which are pretty extreme as well. Does that sort of make sense?
It makes so much sense. And I have so much respect for the statement of people that most people don't see what brought you to that point. You know what I mean? To be able to even take on an adventure like a transatlantic sub crossing. But the effort, I mean, that B-roll film sounds amazing. I hope you do something with that, and we get to experience it.
Time. Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. Actually, I found a little picture of when I was doing my training sessions, and I think that was when I realized that I was doing stuff that was a little different to most people. It was a post that I did where I'd done a downwinder by myself from the waterfront in Cape Town to Aesfontein, which was checking if I could do the 12-hour world record. And I'd done it by myself. The wind was between 25 to 40 knots. Sea state was 3 to 5 meters. I was roughly 5 to 10 miles offshore all the time. And I came in and I was like, oh, very happy I got to Aesfontein. And my post is like, very happy I got to Aesfontein. I just did 69.9 kilometers in 7 hours, was 6 hours and 50 minutes. And then I started looking at after when I posted that, because people were like, oh my God, that's amazing. What? That's amazing distance and time. And then I was like, oh, I wonder what other races there are, or other distances there out there people are doing. And when I started looking it up, then I realized that the Molokai, which I hadn't done at that point, the Molokai was 15 kilometers shorter than that, than my training run that I had just done by myself, except for in super hectic, extreme conditions, but like with no one else around, just like a training mission. And then I was like, wow, okay, maybe not everyone else is doing this stuff, which is quite interesting.
Going back to nothing you do is ordinary, right?
Anyway.
So Chris, the concept of your B-roll films brings in this first question from one of Stand Up Journal's viewers. And this is from Nihal Hakim. And she says, it was super inspirational to witness a glimpse of the crossing within the film. I only wish it were an unpractical 2 to 3 hours so we could have lived more of the day-to-day challenges with you. Is there any particular was there any particular incident that was instrumental to your success that didn't make it into the movie that you can share with us?
That is a great question. There's so much that didn't make it into the film. You know, I think a lot of people don't also realize that this was the 55-minute and we actually made a 90-minute. And I feel like there are times in the 90-minute that it just feels like it's maybe a little too long because it's very very difficult to be able to keep attention for that long as well. But there are a lot of things we had to take out. And there's also like the whole giant squid and that kind of stuff in the middle of the storm, which got really hectic, which obviously I wasn't able to add in because I didn't have footage of me trying to dive down and wrestle this giant squid, even though I would have made it really great.
You've referenced that a couple of times. Can you just give us some detail on what happened with the giant squid?
I'll give you a little bit of a snippet, but you see, that's the difference between the film and the book, because the book is going to come out next year, and I'll have all the stuff that I couldn't put in the film because we had to cut so much out, and also because there was a lot of stuff that we didn't have footage of because it wasn't Hollywood and I wasn't filming in the moment all the time. So, I mean, the giant squid was a really scary experience, and it was really something that I battled to try and understand what was happening in the moment because it was in such a extreme environment. It was in the middle of like the biggest storm I think that I got caught on the entire journey, and it was in the middle of the night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly I was starting to get pulled in the wrong direction. And the reason why I'm getting pulled is because I put out what's called my parachute anchor. And when people watch the film, they saw me putting out that little yellow thing that I pull off the side, which opens up like a parachute and slows you down and sort of holds your head into the wind. And even though it's pretty disruptive in there and it's really hard to sleep, and it's in that storm, I think there's some footage of me with my eyes are like lit like saucers. It looks like I'm on drugs or something, but it's actually that I'm terrified and I'm just trying to get through the night. And every single 3 to 5 minutes, there's a wave that hits the side or just goes past where you like go into bracing up against the side of your tiny little craft because you think you're going to get flipped over. And every single wave that hits the side of your craft sounds like the craft is disintegrating around you. And it's pitch black. You're in the middle of a storm. You're in a craft that's so small that it really shouldn't be out there. And it is really mentally the most draining emotional experience you can imagine. And then on top of that, besides being in that environment, in this dark, scary place with waves battering you around and you're just trying to survive until morning, suddenly I started getting pulled through the top of these waves. And my chart plotter, which is my little instrumentation, gives me all my data in regarding to the direction I'm traveling, speed I'm traveling. So normally when I was with when I was going with the storm, with the parachute anchor out, I was drifting with the conditions at just under 1 knot, like pretty much like 3/4 of a knot with the conditions. So with the wind, but suddenly I was getting dragged into the conditions. So I was getting pulled forward through the conditions, like through into it. So imagine normally going with the conditions. So you've got, let's say, 28 to 45 knots of breeze and 5-meter seas. So like 10 to 15-foot seas and like super stormy conditions at night. And you're dragging with the conditions. The conditions are moving at like 30 miles to 40 miles an hour, and the waves are going that way, and you're traveling at 1 mile, almost 1 mile an hour with it because you're getting dragged. and then suddenly you start getting dragged into and through the conditions forward. And that should never happen. That doesn't happen. Not even like if you got caught on like a giant fishing net that had got left behind by a trawler, you'd still, my trajectory of movement and drag would have slowed down dramatically to maybe a quarter of a knot. But I'd still be going with the conditions in the same direction as the wind, because that's what's dragging me. But so when I started realizing what was happening, because suddenly everything started getting a lot more violent and volatile, and I was starting to see like sheets of water going over the top of the craft when I was looking out through my cabin. And that's because I was getting the nose and the bow of my craft was getting pulled down through the top of these waves by some creature or something. And first of all, I didn't know what was happening. Then I tried to narrow it down to like what was happening, looked at my instruments, and I was like, my instruments just confused me because I'm super fatigued. I'm super drained physically, mentally, and emotionally, and I'm stupidly tired. And it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm trying to piece together what's happening. I can't really be outside because it's too dangerous. And then you're trying to figure out what is actually happening. And then when I started analyzing my feedback on my data on my little chart plotter, it was telling me that I was actually moving forward into the conditions at like 1.5 knots, which made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever, because that just shouldn't be possible. Like that's not possible really, because it means something's pulling you into the conditions like an engine. And I wasn't hooked on any fishing vessels. I wasn't hooked on anything that I could see, and there was nothing around me. And then it was quite a jerking kind of motion. And, I narrowed it down to like what it could possibly be. And there are only two creatures on the face of the planet that have the ability to be able to drag you and a 1 ton craft with a buoyancy ratio of like 2 or 3 tons through and into the conditions at that speed, and that's a whale or a giant squid. But whales generally, like I've swum with whales and been with whales all my life, and they're very smooth in how they swim, even when they are under stress. They're still smooth in how they travel through the water. Whereas a giant squid, they are the creatures of the deep, and they come up at night to be able to check light, because they're attracted to light. And there are multiple different instances and stories of when you speak to a lot of fishermen, you'll actually be amazed at how many of those stories there are. And I think it just came up. It got attracted by one of the lights on the stern of my craft, and it came up and got to the surface, and then realized that it was just something interesting, but nothing interesting that it could feed on, and turned around to go down. And I think it got stuck in my parachute anchor, and then it got a fright, and it freaked out, and it tried to dive like continuously in that direction.
Yeah.
And that's why the motion was so sort of violent and erratic, like pulling me like really weird directions. And then I had to try, like once I'd figured like out roughly what it was, I actually ended up getting 11 on the line, which was my routing guy that you saw from the film, who was an amazing individual. And, I narrowed it down to what I thought, but I didn't tell him what it was, because I wanted him actually to analyze what it was and give me the feedback to reconfirm what I was thinking, and just to confirm that I wasn't going completely insane. And I did get him on the line via text over the satellite phone, and I got the message back, which is the scariest digital message that I've ever received across any device in my entire life, which read back, "Yes, Chris, you are either stuck on a whale or a giant squid. You need to release yourself as soon as possible, otherwise it will take you and your craft down with it.
Down.
So please take immediate dramatic action to do whatever you think is necessary." And that's quite an interesting digital message to get when you're in the middle of a storm, 1,000 miles from anyone in the middle of the night, and now you're getting confirmed what you thought, and that you're not actually going completely mad, and you need to actually get out into the storm now and actually do something quickly before it's going to escalate into something that could be deadly to your potential survival. You know, and I think that goes back to a couple of things that we're talking about, I think, on our last Q&A session, which is about like learning to prioritize and deal with things with immediate intention and with precision, focus, and immediacy and a state of urgency before things start stacking and becoming, getting out of control. And I think that you can apply that to all areas of life. I think we often procrastinate too much in a lot of areas of our life, and I think we need to learn to be better to, when things crop up, don't delay them, don't put them off, just get them done as quickly as you can, because if you don't, other things start unfolding and start stacking on them, and then that's when people get overwhelmed. We all get overwhelmed at times, and that's when people get overwhelmed, is when their things start stacking too much to start dealing with. They're like, oh, I can't take it, there's too much to deal with, and that's when paralysis happens and people end up doing nothing, and that's the worst thing you can do. You've got to segment them, and as soon as something comes up that's really important, like filter down and prioritize what's the most important that needs to be dealt with immediately, deal with it as quickly as possible, move forward. The worst thing you can do is do nothing. Rather do something, because then at least you'll get a result and you know whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, but at least you did something and you've got feedback, so you can take that feedback and take action and immediately keep on remedying until you get the right outcome. But if you don't do anything, the likelihood is that things are going to stack, and then you become overwhelmed, or if you do nothing, that's probably the worst thing to do. So, like, moral of the story in life, always do something, take action quickly.
Everything that you just said there reminded me of what we're facing with the climate crisis. That the worst thing that can be done is to do nothing and to watch these events begin to cascade on top of one another, and then feeling like we're totally out of control. Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's going to happen unless we're able to begin to take I love whatever Levin just said, dramatic, instantaneous action now. Just the way you described that just brought all of that to my mind. And I know that the, working with the environment is such a large piece of what you do. Your passion is in that protecting of the ocean. It's just amazing. It just drove that message home to me all over again.
Yeah, but I think you're spot on. Like, it's the same thing with climate, and like everybody's like, oh, it's too big for me to be able to deal with. Like, I'm just one person. But you've got to, I always go back to that same thing. Just ask yourself one question. Well, don't think about the overwhelming situation. Just ask one simple question. What can I do? As one human, what can I do? What one small action can I take that will benefit others or benefit the planet? And it's very simple. Plant a tree. Like, how difficult is it to plant a tree? How difficult is it to pay to plant a tree? Like, plant a mangrove. Go and organize a beach cleanup. Take part in a beach cleanup. Make better decisions each and every day in some small way. Like, every single time you go out and you make a decision to go out and shop for something, are you thinking and being mindful about the decisions that you make in every single one of your buying decisions, in regarding to the plastic bag that gets given to you at the checkout, in regarding to the type of apparel or clothing that you are wearing and purchasing? Are you recycling it? Are you, every time if it gets a hole in it, or do you just replace it? Do you not get it fixed? Are you buying it from a company like, as an example, a Patagonia or a Finisterre, or a company that gives 1% back to the planet, that uses paper bags, that has a sustainable way of looking at the way that they put together their clothing line? How do they give back? Every decision that we make, like from the cutlery that we use when we are traveling, to when we're traveling, how much are we traveling? Are we offsetting our carbon footprint from when we take a plane, or when we're driving around in our car every day? Or can we choose to ride a bike instead of taking the car? Like, there's so many decisions that we make as humans daily that impact negatively on the environment. So I think, people always like, oh, it's so overwhelming, I can't do anything with the climate crisis. Like there's nothing I can do. It's too big. It's not too big. Like, it all starts with you, actually, with every single one of us, making small decisions daily. And the people that can and have the ability to be able to make more impact and make a bigger difference, that's awesome. Carry on doing it. But if everybody said, oh, it's too big for me, I can't do anything, then no one would do anything and the world would come to a horrendous end. So the objective is to always do something, no matter what. Like, no matter if you don't think you can make the difference that's going to change the world, do something is better than doing nothing. That's why, it's the same as the people, people want to lose weight or anything else. The person that goes for a 10-minute walk is running circles around the person that's thinking about it, sitting on the couch watching Netflix. The person, that's the athlete. The athlete is the person that actually just went for a 5-minute walk because that was tenfold better than thinking about it and deciding to just flip the channel and watch something else.
Absolutely. And every individual action that we take is part of a collective, right? And
correct.
So there is an impact, even if we may not personally feel it or see it, it is a part of a larger group if everybody is taking action in the way that they can. I mean, just here, where I live, I've stopped doing any kind of takeout food just because I can't stand those containers, that everything comes in plastic. But at the same time, I'm letting restaurants that, it's a small town out here, I'm letting them know why. So that it, hopefully will drive them to find a different type of container, right? To create, to do their takeouts with. So if enough people do something simple like that, your voice gets heard. So anyway, I don't want to get off on change. I know you and I can talk about.
But you're 100% right, and it's about small actions daily that create habitual change. And the more you do something, like it's exactly the same thing as people like that haven't gone to the gym or whatever, and they want to get fit, but they. To do that first run or to do that first time to the gym is hard. And for the first 5 to 10 times, it is hard. But then it becomes easier. The more you do it, it becomes a habit. And then your body starts like craving it. And it's like, I feel really good when I go for a run now. I'm going to continue on doing it. But it's always hard in the beginning, creating that change. And it's like having the consistency to be able to consistently take those small daily acts that all add up to become a new habit. That becomes a new characteristic, that becomes a better version of yourself.
And that's how we make change.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
More questions.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Julie Monaco. And Julie wanted to ask about the current that you were following from Morocco to Antigua. She says, was there a major current flow in your course that was planned, and how did it actually play out for you in reality?
Okay, great question. And before we even go into that, like I was just actually looking at it right now, you see, bio cup, completely biodegradable. So again, like the place that I had to go to was a 20-minute detour from 5 different other coffee places that I could have got my coffee from. But I chose to go 20 minutes in another direction or 15 minutes to go and get it from here because they make the right choices. So I will support them. And even if it takes more out of my day to do that, it's about making the right decisions. And when you're empowered with knowledge, you can't really, you have no excuses not to make the right decisions. That's okay. Sorry. The currents. Okay, great question. Sorry, what was her name? Julie, thank you very much for that great question. So this is actually interesting because it's almost like copy and paste of the same question that you could ask for the Trans-Pacific that I'm working on at the moment. That project going from California to Hawaii is almost the same trajectory as Morocco to the Caribbean. So what happens in the beginning is when I went down Morocco, in the first 500 miles, 350 to 500 miles, I'm not in the right current at all. So the current isn't going in the right direction to help me at all. And you've got to get into what's called the trade winds and the trade routes. So current is driven by wind. So wind in certain direction continuously over time creates current, along with the high pressure systems. So if you look at the whole globe, you've got the equator, and then you've got the northern hemisphere, and you've got the southern hemisphere, and each one has a high pressure system, and then everything revolves around that, and obviously they go the opposite direction and the opposite. See if you can do that in the opposite direction while you're doing. Each one goes in the opposite direction, as you know. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get into that flow, into being in the right part of that high pressure system, which when the high pressure system goes around like that, the wind curves around the high pressure, and the currents follow that wind pattern. So when you know those routes and you know those wind patterns and you know the high pressure systems, so over the right time of the year, the high pressure system either strengthens or weakens and moves either north or south. And that's why when we talk about making sure that I leave at the right time of the year, you want to make sure that you're in the right time of the year where the high pressure system strengthens in certain areas and moves either up or down to be able to help your trajectory along the course that you're planning on going. So everything's really about your weather window to make sure you're going right during the perfect weather window, so you can be assured of the most stable environment and the most consistent weather in the right direction. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you've got the wind in the right direction, once I got 350 to 500, so let's say 200 to 300 miles south of the Canary Islands, then I started to get the wind sort of starting to help me and come in the sort of right direction behind me more consistently. And then about 500 miles in, I started to get a little bit of current that went in the right direction behind me, and then started to become more consistent as I curved around to get to like almost halfway across the Atlantic, and then the rest of the way to the Caribbean, because it mirrors that high pressure system and how the trajectory works. And it's exactly the same for my route and planning for the Trans-Pacific, which leaves from when I left from Half Moon Bay. It's again, you have to get all the way down south. So you have to get out like at least 50 to 150 miles out, and then down further south to where the high pressure system starts bending. And so the high pressure system comes like this. And think of San Francisco up here, San Diego here, Mexico here, and I've got to be like 400 miles out here to get the bend of when it starts bending to go towards Hawaii. And it bends more and more and more. So the first week or 10 days, I'll probably start again in Ventura or Santa Barbara, which is further south. And that's because the wind is more stable and milder further down south. And now that I know that with my little craft and the wing and the foils that I've got on it, I can go across the wind a lot more than I was able to on the SUP. So I can get out into those conditions that I want with the wind behind me a lot easier. And as soon as I get 500 miles out, then I get into the trades as they start bending around, and the currents literally follow that. So the objective is you get roughly for the first week to 10 days, I'll almost get no current, or the current will be actually pushing me down for like south, and I'll be going across it. And then as soon as I get like sort of 500 to 700 miles out, then I'll start getting into the trades and the wind and the current sort of starting to bend with me, and I'll still be going slightly across it, but less. And then by the time I get like 1,000 miles out, then I'm in the proper trades and the current, which is almost angling almost to Hawaii. So it's about 30 degrees off. So then you've got it almost with you, but you have to get through the first 2 weeks first. So that's why I always say, like, getting through the first 3 weeks is always the toughest, because you're leaving from really far north to be able to get your trajectory out to get into the conditions that you want to, where things become more stable. They become warmer as you go further south. So the air temperature becomes warmer, the water temperature becomes warmer, and people don't realize the combination of cold air and cold water together at night when things get moist, get very cold with the wind chill factor. So you're wanting to get further south for your wind to get warmer, milder, more stable, your water temperature to get warmer, which creates a milder environment for you to get into and survive in. And then you wanted to get further out so you can get into the current and where it starts bending into the trades, because then you start getting to more tropical weather and more current and wind behind you or in your aft quarter. And that becomes more consistent. And then you get into the trades, and the trades are known as the trades because they are roughly consistent, roughly in the certain quarter either way, and roughly 10 to 20 knots quite consistently, with 5 to 10 knots, and then 20 to 25 knots as your sort of variance zones. So that's what you're pretty much going to get almost every day consistently over that period. No,
that's amazing, and I know that answers her question very thoroughly. And I just wanted to add on to that, as I said to you in our last interview, I remember so clearly watching on your live tracker when I saw you, like you were maybe about halfway across, and I have minimal understanding of winds and current like that, but I do understand the trade winds, and I saw when you just approached that, and I was like, that's it, game over. Like, he's going to make it. Like, as soon as he gets into those trades, like, everything is going, and there was nothing that was, there was no sign from you that you were, I mean, I'm sure you were tired, but there was no sign of anything but forward momentum at that point. Yeah. You were just moving forward. And then when I realized you were about to cross into the trades, I mean, I think I was the first, I always take credit for this. I think I was the first person that realized you were going to do it, because there it was, like you were going to carry yourself to the Caribbean, using those winds. It was, by far one of the most exciting things I've done. And people who have watched your live tracker or are going to watch your live tracker, it's not as I don't know, vague as it sounds, because if you check it every day, there's a lot to be learned there. And also it's quite exciting to see the progress of this thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. And I think it's as exciting for me as well. Like, I wish I could actually do like really in-depth updates, like every 3 days, to talk about my trajectory and my navigation and the winds and how they're changing and how I'm changing across because of this, and how I'm, changing my angle because of this. And this is the reason why I'm going across at 45 degrees for the next 5 days until I get to this point. Yeah. But, I'm obviously not able to, because I'm literally just trying to, like trying to survive in battle, like 12 to 15 hours a day. But you're 100% right. And I think once you get into those sort of trades, and I think it was like sort of like, if you break up the whole journey into eights, okay, and say 4 eights is halfway. I think as soon as I got into just into 3 eights, the 3 eights, like just before I got to like the quarter before halfway, that's when I got through like the worst part of like the first like 800, 500 to like 500, 800 miles was hell, absolute hell. Like everything broke, everything went wrong. And like, that's when most people thought I was either going to die or I was going to give up, or like I was going to get rescued or whatever. And there were a lot of times where it was pretty borderline many times. Yeah. But, like as soon as I got to like 50 miles past the Canaries, then I got through like the worst of it. And I was like, wow, okay, if I can get through just past this point and I can survive and figure stuff out, then I can definitely get through to the next segment, which is the next third. And things hopefully should get a little easier. And like, because I was like, okay, I've got through every single worst case scenario that I can possibly imagine. And I've managed to get through it and make stuff work, figure stuff out, like get creative, find solutions, and get through it. Like, if I can get through the last 3 weeks, then I'm pretty sure I can get through pretty much anything. And I'm not going to say that just because I don't want to jinx it, because that's when things will probably go wrong even more, something that I hadn't thought of. But if I can just get through that next 500 miles, things should get a lot easier, because things are going to start getting warmer. I'm going to start getting into the trades. I'm going to, like, the air temperatures already got warmer. I'm going to be able to start going across more, so I'm going to be able to get more solar. So I'm going to be able to charge my battery banks more, which is going to make all my systems run better. I'm going to be able to make more water. I'm going to be able to do all those kind of things. And then I remember I was still in like full foul weather gear every single day, like multiple layers. And it's just uncomfortable. I was sleeping in wet gear all the time because it took so much time and effort to try and get things off and then get things back on again in your tiny little cabin when you've only got, an hour and a half to sleep. You're like, it was just a complete waste of time. So, once I got through that first 500, then things became a lot easier quite simply. And what happens is you start leaving all your other filters and other things that make you human that you need on land behind, and you start morphing into this creature that's designed to just survive in the ocean, if you know what I mean. So you start morphing into your environments, and you start building a routine where you're becoming comfortable, and your routine is pretty much set every day, and you start becoming starts becoming your norm, and you start becoming comfortable with that routine as your daily. That's what happens every day. Just a slightly different version of that, and your body starts becoming comfortable with that, and your mind starts becoming comfortable with that, and your mental state starts handling that that's what it needs to adapt to in order to survive in its new environment. And it's amazing. Most people don't realize that as humans, as creatures, we are incredible adaptability. We have incredible adaptability to be able to morph ourselves and metamorphosize ourselves into adapting to our environment. But most of us never know that because we never really have to do it to that extreme, because we're not forced to. And we are creatures of comfort. That's why we talk about leaving our comfort zone. That's why people stay in their comfort zone, because it's uncomfortable. They don't like uncomfortable things. Why would I want to do that? I want to stay in my little happy place. But when you do that, and you realize what we are capable of, and what we as a species and as beings are able to adapt to pretty much anything. And I think once I got to just before the halfway mark, as you said, like I got into a routine, I'd started to get into the trades like 1,000 miles out. And I was like, okay, things are getting better. I've got into a routine. I've become this new like ocean sea pirate creature guy. And like, I'm actually starting to enjoy it. I've like managed all the systems. I've figured out solutions to a whole lot of my steering problems. I'd figured out that my autopilot was a disaster, and I was basically going to have to foot steer, and created a steering system which actually attached two of the lines to my harness, which if I fell overboard, it would pull my craft so it turned up into the wind. And I was like almost like hand steering and foot steering like the whole way, which meant I was wiggling around. And that's why my distance that I ended up doing was probably 800 miles longer than it should have been, or even longer, maybe 1,000 miles longer than it should have been, 800 miles, because I was doing this all the time and I wasn't on autopilot. And autopilot takes you straight point to point, but my autopilot had failed, and I'd burned through 5 different rams. The rams are the things that power the craft to be able to keep it in the right direction. And I realized that, and I was like, okay, well, I need to make it work another way. And you've got to have a backup of a backup of a backup. And if you don't, figure one out, because no one's going to help you. You better figure it out yourself. So yeah. And I think when I got to the halfway mark, as you said, like I'd already, like I was there in my head. I'd watched the movie of me finishing already, like in full color, HD, 4K.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I mean, like it was crystal clear. Like I was already in my head. I was already working on the next project. Like in my head, it was done. Like if I could get through to the halfway mark, there's no way that I wasn't going to finish. Like after what I got through in the first like 3 weeks, people, like the film doesn't even give it a glimpse of like how hectic it actually was.
I can't wait for the book.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
really,
going to be interesting
to get some of those details.
Yeah, next year, I'm I'm trying to get the manuscripts to my really amazing editor in the next couple of weeks, and then I actually go and spend 4 days with her to run through everything as well, to streamline everything. And then there are 2 books that come out that I don't know how I'm going to release them. One's sort of like a toolkit for life, which actually is sort of for mental health, of how you get through difficult and challenging times. And that one's going to be really fascinating, because I haven't delved into that space before, but a lot of the tools that I've used on this journey and other journeys will really help people. They just give people real life tools that you can, like a checklist that you can run through, that help you get through struggle when you get into a negative space or a dark space or mild depression. Like there are a lot of different things you can do besides having to go to a doctor and just get a prescription. There are multiple things you can do naturally that'll help you get into a positive space and help you move forward. And I think that'll really help people. And that's what I love to do. Like I don't make money from what I do. I need to try and figure out a way to make money. But I like to be able to try and take what I do to give people tools to be able to help them get through and transcend difficulty, challenges, and become a better version of themselves and achieve their greatness, because we all have greatness within us.
I mean, I think you fit perfectly into that space of writing a book like that, just in tools and tips for, greater mental resilience. I mean, that's everything about you that I know, that is something that I appreciate the most, certainly, is your ability to like mentally manage situations that the rest of us are like, I don't even understand what just happened, But speaking of that, so the next question comes from Kevin Ahern, and you were talking so well about those first 2 weeks, passing by the Canary Islands and all the upset that happened. And I know from, your captain's log that you had cut your finger really badly at one point, and that some people don't know you'd also torn your rotator cuff and were continuing to paddle. And so the question is, what level of medical emergency were you prepared for? And what supplies did you have on board for that kind of emergency? So what I think what he means is like, what level of medical emergency were you able to manage? And was there something beyond that that you were willing to say, maybe you were willing to call it in at that point to get picked up?
Yeah, I think great question, Kevin. I had a lot of, I have amazing, really small team. And one of my really good friends is actually an ex-partner from a long time ago, who's still a really good friend of mine, a lady called Linnell Hooks. And she is a doctor, and she was very helpful and helped me put together a really substantial medical kit that would allow me to be able to actually deal with pretty much all the things that I thought that might come up, and then a whole lot more. So basically, besides getting eaten by a shark or run over by a super tanker, pretty much everything else I should have been able to deal with. And then if I got, eaten by a shark or run over by a super tanker, there's not really much anything anyone can do anyway. So hopefully I'll be able to get some good GoPro footage, so at least it would be able to go into the film, so someone could put it together afterwards and know what happened. If I got eaten by the shark, I'll try and make sure that my arm's sticking out of the shark's mouth with the GoPro, and not just throw it onto the deck of the craft before I get eaten completely. No, I think, Kevin, I had a really amazing first aid kit, and I come from a rescue and training background as well, so I've always been very vigilant about my first aid and making sure I've got the right supplies with me. And I pretty much had everything that would deal with major adversity, from minor stuff, from minor pills for pain and nausea and headache and all the like tummy upset and runny tummy and all that kind of stuff, and right down to like eye issues, ear problems, chest infection, wide spectrum antibiotic, special creams for antiseptic, and then like heavier stuff for if I got like really, really damaged in whatever capacity that I could take. And I think there's one little piece in the film where I talk about like I actually like end up coughing and spitting out the little cabin window, and I said, sorry, I'm just dealing with a bit of chest infection. And that was actually like my immune system had got really, really low because I'd been in some super heavy trade wind conditions for probably 12 days straight. So the wind was probably 20 to 30 knots for 12 days. I thought I was going to have a break somewhere in between that. But what happens when the conditions were that sort of heavy is my craft was really, really small. And because it was so low to the water and there was so much water coming over my deck that I couldn't open my hatches, which I realized at that point were leaking. I couldn't get to some of my food. And I was I think that's when I broke like the 12-hour and the 24-hour record, open ocean record for myself. and for the world of unsupported distance over time, because I was trying to get as much mileage as possible, because I was trying to cheat myself to push harder, because I knew I was running out of food. And the only way I could trick my mind to push harder was to set myself really difficult goals. And so when I was in those conditions, I realized that if I really pushed hard, I could maximize the distance that I was getting in those really difficult conditions. But because I was pushing it so much, and I was doing like 12 to 15 hours a day and pushing it as hard as I could, like my immune system like almost crashed, because I was completely depleting myself. And then I had 1 or 2 days where I actually, the sea state was really quite intense, and I ended up taking off down like some big open ocean swells. The craft ended up jackknifing because it broached at the bottom and then rolled, and I was attached. So then I got rolled over the craft underneath the water, and I almost like dislocated my wrist because I was trying to hang on. And then I realized I couldn't. If I was going to carry on holding on, I was going to break my wrist. So I had to let go and then make sure that my harness engaged to my emergency tether, and my backup big wave leash, which was attached from my ankle to the craft on a different side, didn't snap, so I didn't get separated from my craft. But when I got rolled over my craft, I got scraped all the way down like my back. And I think there's some footage in there of me talking about being scraped and rolled. And like, I didn't go into detail about how freaking intense those experiences were. Like if we had managed to capture that kind of experience, people would have been like, oh my God, he just nearly died. Like, that's how intense those kind of experiences were. Yeah. And now, because I was like, then I had like all these scrapes, and over your journey, you slowly damage yourself on multiple different things. And that's why when Levin talks about like you managing over the whole journey, all you're doing is managing decline. You're not just managing decline from your mental state, your emotional state, your physical state, where your body's actually starting to eat itself, but also you're getting every couple of days or every 5 days, you're getting another little nick on your finger from opening up the hatch, because your fingers are always wet. You stubbing your toe slightly or catching it on something, and you got another little nick. And by the time you get to this point in the journey, I probably had like 15 little holes in me all over the place. So your immune system is trying to now, and all your holes are like, all your cuts and scrapes are all wet all the time. And some of those scrapes you really can't get to very easily because they're on your back, and you can't, there's no one around to be able to help you manage it. So you're having to manage this, trying to get everything dry every session. And every time your body's like not only trying to deal with the fatigue and your body breaking down and the amount of stress you're putting it under every single day, it's also having to fight infection across like 15 different like cuts and scrapes all the time, until your body eventually goes, hold on a second, time out. I'm going to give you something else that will slow you down. And if you don't listen to that, I'll make it then an organ failure on top of that, until you start slowing yourself down because you have to. And that's what's starting to happen. Like, I had all these like scrapes. I wasn't eating enough. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I was pushing myself too much, and everything started getting really hectic. And I ended up actually taking a half day off, I think, or like a night and a morning until 12 o'clock, where I was like, I'm putting myself on the parachute anchor. And then I was going to I'd actually figure out a way to not put myself on the parachute anchor and lock off the steering system to the side. So I got like pushed sideways, like crabbing along sideways. So I was actually still going in the direction that I wanted to, not exactly the direction, but sort of to that point. But then I could manage myself. I spent like 12 to 15 hours just focusing on trying to get sleep, eating as much as I could, eating the right stuff, getting as much hydration as possible, managing my wounds, like constantly, like 4 different sessions of like fixing myself until I got to the point. And then I also started taking pills because I started to get the chest infection. But the pills that I got made me lose my equilibrium. So it made me disorientated, and I couldn't keep my balance. So then I stayed another 4 hours on parachute anchor. I actually went onto parachute anchor just to be able to let the pills that I was on go on to get out of my system. But I had pretty much everything that you could need. And I'm not a pill guy, so I don't take antibiotics unless I need them, and I don't take like a lot of people take I don't know, what are those things, ibuprofens and all that kind of thing for pain. Like I literally, even when I come out of surgery, I generally don't take, like they put you on something and then they'll give you all the pills to take with you when you go home. Like I never take them when I go home at all. I just work through it. And I I ended up, I think 2 weeks later, breaking my big toe. And then 2 weeks after that, I ended up damaging my rotator cuff. And then actually the last week and a half when I was paddling a week straight on one side to get up to that one last waypoint when the storm was going to hit, so I could get to Antigua when it shifted around. Like I ended up ripping half my bicep off my shoulder blade. And then I started, then it was super painful and I realized I damaged it, but I knew I needed to get to that waypoint before the storm changed to be able to give me the trajectory over the last 2 days to be able to come into Antigua. Otherwise I was going to miss all the islands and end up in Venezuela like another 3 weeks later, which wasn't going to be possible because I didn't have enough food. So I knew I needed to get there. So I needed to just push through the pain. So the only time I actually took painkiller tablets were when I damaged my bicep and I was starting to rip off and I was still having to paddle on the same side. And then you learn ways to be able to manipulate your mental state to turn off pain almost like a switch. You just focus on other things because the things that you focus on become more real and the things you focus on become more prominent in your mind. So you've got to trick your mind to focus on other things. It's like mental trickery really and mental distraction. And I ended up running out of all the painkiller tablets that I had after 4 days of that. And then the last 2 days I had nothing. And then I just had to just work my way mentally through how to mentally figure out little tools and manipulate your mental state into turning off pain or just reframing it so you don't focus on it.
Wow. Yeah. So I hope that all of that is in that book that you have coming out.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. That's true. I think most people don't need that level of manipulating yourself out of thinking about pain. Thank you though. That was a really deep explanation of some of those experiences that you've been through.
But I think mental distraction is a really valuable tool. If you learn how to mentally distract yourself when you need to, I think a lot of people don't realize your mind is like a muscle and it needs to be practiced and trained, and like anything, you can train it to do anything. And if you give it distractions, most people don't realize your mind is amazing in regarding to problem solving. And when you, and when I say problem solving, it ties directly into mental distraction because it likes to help you figure out stuff. So if you give it a task, it'll focus on that task and it gets excited. So you're almost giving it something to solve. If you give it something to solve, then all its focus and energy is focused on that. Whereas often when we get injured or we get hurt, we focus on what it is that got hurt. So it's oh my God, it's sore, my knee, my knee. And you're so focused on that's where your pain focuses because you're focusing on it. Yeah. And because most of us don't realize that we don't have the awareness to know that if we train our mind to focus on something else and populate something else, then it removes the focus away from what the pain is and what is sore and takes it away onto focusing on something else, asking your mind to focus on something else. Hey, what am I going to do when I get to the other side? Who am I going to meet? Who am I going to call? What is it going to look like? And then your mind starts focusing on populating that and distracting yourself from the pain that you're actually feeling. It's just ways of being able to train your mind to be able to deviate onto focusing on something else. So it removes its focus on the thing that's actually painful. Interesting.
That your mind can actually diminish the pain by shifting your focus. That's
mental distraction.
There's a whole science in there somewhere.
Sorry, next question.
So our next question is from, where'd she go? Her name is Taro Tucker, and it relates back to what you were saying about when all the craft was always wet and that you had your your food was getting wet, right? And so she asks, why did you design the food to be stored down inside the paddleboard? And what was your first thought when you realized the food hatch was filled with water? How much food did you lose, and how did that affect, your journey? How did that affect how you finished your journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're right. So like all these kind of things people think about afterwards, and they're like, "Huh, I wonder why you put it there. It's not the cleverest place to put it." Um, and you're right, but the interesting thing is that you're right. She's right, 100% right, but actually not that much, because so you always want to have your weight and the stuff that you're not using, and your most amount of dead weight. You want to have at the lowest point on your craft, because the lowest point gives yourself the stability. As the higher you have your dead weight, the more it makes an effect on your angle of gravity, your center of gravity, and your center pendulum effect of how much that affects the roll of the craft. So you want to have all your weight, the heavier stuff that you're not using, at the lowest point of your craft. So to answer the question, that is why my food was there. Second of all, the hatches were never meant to leak. What we didn't know that was going to happen. And in all the testing that we had done, that never happened. But we were never testing open ocean for like 2, 3, 5 weeks at a time. And the freeze-dried food packs are actually, they sealed watertight packages. So they shouldn't leak even if they get wet anyway. So it wasn't really a problem. And over and above that, only a third to half of my food was in that area of the craft.
Okay.
You must remember that I was carrying 100 days of food. 100 days of food multiplied by 3 packs and little energy bars and stuff on top of that is a lot of food. And I had very little space to store 100 days of food. So a third of my food was underneath where I slept, a third was in the aft compartment, and a third was in the lowest point of the craft. And unfortunately, when my hatches started leaking, which I only realized about halfway along the journey, which started becoming more and more of an issue, because the weather got more and more intense for longer periods of time, so I wasn't able to open the hatches and get out the food. When I was able to, then the food had been sitting in the leaking hatches, which had been sitting in for probably 3 to 4 weeks. So they designed those watertight, like freeze-dried food packs. They're designed to be waterproof, but they're not designed to sit in water for a month. And when you're talking about also not just normal fresh water, but salt water, and salt water eats everything. So that's why, like, I'd say probably a third of the food that I had in those compartments got damaged, and that was a third of my total capacity. So
Right.
I was managed.
It was only 100 days.
Yes, so that took it down to like 90 days, and I knew that I was going to be out there for longer than 90 days. So already a week before, I was already on rations. So I'd already started cutting back on the stuff that I could eat and had left. And I only had like 5 days of food left, 10 days before I finished, So everything I was eating was like half. So when you're talking about managing decline, that's what I was managing, and you, like, even on the entire journey, every single day, you're not actually putting in as much carbs into your body as you're taking out all the time. And you're trying, but no matter how much you actually put in, you're burning more than you put in. So you are constantly atrophying. So your body's starting to slowly eat itself. And I lost like 20% of my entire body mass, which is like half a Backstreet Boy. Like, your body's not meant to lose that much. It's not designed to lose that much body mass, especially when you have like, 4% or 2% body fat index before you leave, because I was as fit and lean as I could possibly be. And I tried to eat as much as I could before I left to try and actually add on weight and stop training, just so I could take on an extra 5 kilograms. And I think I left, I don't know the exact pound ratio, but I left on like 84 kilograms and I arrived at like 58. So like there was a lot, like, it's almost, it's like more than 20, actually more. It's like 24% of your body mass. So you're losing probably 5% body mass and 20% like muscle and body, like muscles and
right.
like everything. Your muscles, your flesh, your whole system starts eating itself.
Yeah.
And I was also, battling to make enough water. So I was also operating on way less water from a hydration perspective a day than I should have been functioning on, because I was battling to manage all my systems with the amount of energy that my craft could make through the solar power. So a lot of my systems would run, and then I'd try and run and make my water maker, which would make like 2 gallons or gallon a day. And that was what I'd use. But I was like working, I was paddling 12 to 15 hours a day, which is more than like a full Ironman. And you're meant to have, a liter an hour, which I was not. I was doing like 350 milliliters an hour, which was almost like, I spoke to one of the top sports scientists afterwards, and they said, wow, Chris, you were like basically borderlining on major renal and organ failure almost 80% of your entire journey. And the fact that you managed to almost flatline along that red line almost the entire journey without having one of your organs failing means that either you are incredibly lucky, but I don't think it was that. It was just that you knew your body so well that you knew how far you could push it, and you were literally just like on that brink all the way through. Yeah. Which is fascinating, and I think that you and that's the thing about those kind of journeys. You get to know yourself, like the famous saying says, like, know thyself, and you get to know yourself like so refinedly well about like how your body feels, how it's reacting to everything, and what it needs and what it doesn't, and when it needs something that you feed it that, and or do the best you can to be able to keep it on that an edge in order to be able to get through to your end goal. But like, that's not sustainable. Like, if that was another 30 days, like my body would have broken down and I would have fallen apart,
Or another week.
Like anything over another week would have been, I think, catastrophic. Like, it was on the edge of like pushing myself to the end max goal, like get to that point and that's it. And, I was fortunate and unfortunate to have that last storm hit me just before the finish, because we were meant to have I was meant to be a really mild finish right up until like 7 days before, where I thought I was going to have like 12 to 15 knots, light trades, and I was going to be like finishing in style, like light mellow. It's going to be able to relax into it, and I'll be like, oh, relax finish.
Yeah,
and that never happened. And in some regards, it was like, I was really bummed because I felt like I really deserved it. I'd worked for it, and it was really unusual to have that kind of storm hit and those kind of conditions for the finish. But now when I look back in hindsight, like, I couldn't have scripted it actually better, because it was so difficult to get all the footage from when the conditions were really intense and really hectic. No one would have seen what it was like. But the only way, like, there's footage of me in the storm, in the first storm in the Canaries, and the GoPro footage that I took from that, but it wasn't really as hectic as it seemed, and as I'd like to capture, because I wasn't really capturing all of it because I wasn't filming when it was super intense. But like, the guys that came out to come, and my brothers, and Shannon Falcone is like the incredible sailor himself, and like sails in the worlds and everything else. He came out in the only craft that could actually get out in the conditions, come and meet me with my brothers and camera crew on board to be able to film me coming in like 3 miles out. And if it wasn't for those conditions at the end, no one would have actually had an idea from the film perspective, what I'd actually been going through and the conditions that I'd been actually dealing with quite like multiple different times on my journey. But if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have captured that, and no one would actually have had an idea of what I'd actually experienced on my journey. And the amazing thing is that all those other, there are other films of like some transatlantic rowers and stuff where they've got like really cool stories. I think there's one of the 4 ladies, I think, that also did leaving, what's it called? Leaving Distance of Shore or something, Leaving Shore or something. And it's a really great film. If anybody hasn't watched it, like a whole lot of women that actually go and paddle across the Pacific, I think, and it's a really amazing film. Everybody should watch it. Losing Sight of Shore, I think it's called, something like that. Maybe Ev also put that in the details for people, because it's a really powerful film as well, and very empowering for women as well. And I think the one thing that I find interesting is that there wasn't they didn't have a lot of that kind of footage, because you're never capturing that in the moment. And they've got like 3 or 4 people trying to capture it. Yes, there was some quite interesting footage that they got of being in the storms, but not the kind of footage that we captured from the end of the film of me coming in. And if it wasn't for that storm and me coming in those conditions, we wouldn't have had that in the film. Like the last part of the film wouldn't have looked so dramatic for the finish, which makes it really powerful and really enticing and really inspiring, because it's the first time you actually get to grips with how incredibly intense it actually was, and how ferocious the ocean is, and how small I am, and how I just get lost amongst these giant seas. And then people like actually grasp like what I was actually doing out there, and how long I'd been out there alone in these kind of elements, doing this by myself. And that's when it brings it to grips, like with people, to be like, holy shit, that's really incredible. And I think even when I look at the film now, like I'm so thankful for that last storm, looking back in hindsight, and like as the greatest gift. And that's why sometimes when we go through challenges and we go through difficult times, and it seems really hard to grasp and to comprehend and to digest at the time, everything happens for a reason, and everything's part of a greater scheme of things, and everything's meant to be just the way it is and the way it's unfolding, even if you don't understand it at the time. And when you look back in hindsight, 6 months or a year or a couple of years down the line, then you look back and go, oh, wow, yes, it was horrendous at the time, but that's why that happened. That's why it's actually, when I look back now, it was the greatest gift to give me those conditions to help me communicate that story and the impact of that story to the world, because without it, people wouldn't have ever got a grasp of how intense it really was.
Right. If it was flat, glassy, perfect weather. I mean, the photographs of your finish are just, I think, some of the most iconic, in water sports history.
Yeah.
So, I completely agree with that. And I was lucky enough, I think you put me in touch with Jeff Clark to hear Jeff's story. And he actually told me he saved it. Like, he didn't tell the story to anybody until he spoke to me.
Wow.
About finding Robin Falcone and getting out on the water with your brothers to go find you that day, to actually help, finish the journey and bring you to shore. And his story, like his recollection of that moment of seeing a little red light bobbing in this tumultuous, heaving, gigantic ocean, and realizing that was you, for him, he said, brought it all home, like made him understand completely exactly what you had accomplished, and the man that you were to be there in, outside of Antigua, an hour or whatever it was outside of Antigua, having paddled all that way. And anyway, Jeff's recollection of that story is magnificent. And I still have copies of that issue of the magazine where we recorded that story. And then of course the story of your crossing, available. And it's just, I think it's worth it, because just reading that perspective of finding a man.
It's like a needle in a haystack, really, and for someone like Jeff, who, is
so respected,
but he's a complete waterman, and he's been out in the most volatile and most extreme ocean environments. And for him to feel that way sort of puts that in perspective, because he doesn't get rocked,
doesn't get wowed
or wowed by much, because he's seen it all, and he's experienced the ocean in its most raw and powerful, state, and most dangerous state. And like, when you realize like how insignificant you are, when you see like a little red dot in this sea of chaos and, power and intensity and just looks like it's just so ominous and everything's just out to destroy and kill you, is just, it's powerful, and it makes you realize how just completely insignificant we are, and how at mercy to the ocean we are. But to be able to still navigate your way through that and still find your way to a pinpoint on the other side of the ocean, like even now looking back for myself, it's just, I'm sometimes like, I'm blown away, like how did I pull that off? And I catch myself like every now and again thinking that to myself, it's just amazing, really.
So I just have one more question, and I don't need to spend much time on it, but it came up, so I wanted to wrap up with this. And it's about the naysayers, right? It's about the people who, no matter what you throw at them, say, he never did it, right? Like this journey never happened. So the question is, what about the naysayers who say they don't believe you actually accomplished this trip, but somehow fabricated it? What do you have to say to them?
Well, I'd really like to try. If maybe someone could send me an idea of how I'd be able to pull that together to try and create something to fabricate how I pulled that off, and had all the footage to show, and the live tracker, and the routing on the GPS tracker, and the routing on my chart plotter, and the captain's logs, and the footage of my face getting hairier along the journey, and the 20% of your body, and the 20% of my body mass, and all the holes all over me, and the craft looking like it had been in the ocean for 93 days or more, and the guys coming out to meet me and finding me at the end. Yeah, that would be a pretty hard one to fabricate. But
yeah, you'd have to have a GPS tracker somehow bob across the Atlantic Ocean for you.
Yeah, and follow all the things that happened on my captain's log.
Right.
As I was going through it, while I was hiding in a hotel somewhere, growing my beard.
Can't let it see you. Yeah.
And then somehow try and get out to the craft that was drifting across the ocean. But how could it
lose weight?
Yeah, and how could it drift across the ocean and do the speeds that it did over that particular time with no autopilot, with me not being on it, and me tracking it and reporting back the records that I was doing and the distances that I was covered? Yeah, that'd be pretty difficult to fabricate, in even if you had a full team trying to figure out how to do that, which I did not, and I didn't have money to afford to do that. so that would.
Thank you for that, because it does come up. I mean, when we post something on Stand Up Journal, like sometimes, I mean, I actually have a name attached to that question. I will send.
I mean, Ev, I think like one thing that I find amazing about that is like, and I've never actually spent any time trying to detail and actually try and answer that to you, like I've just done now, which I think is quite funny. That's probably the first time I've ever actually tried to quantify that for anyone. But I think that like the principle of it is that you always get the naysayers, and you always get the people that are going to try and pick faults. And excuse me, like I used to really battle with that, and it really used to like deeply hurt me that people used to think that I faked it, or that I tried to put it on, or that I tried to like, that I didn't do it, like, or that because those are all the same people that were telling me in the beginning that I could never do it, and it was impossible, and I was going to fail, and it was going to be a waste of taxpayers' money, and it was going to be this, and it was going to be that, and I was so stupid, and it's selfish, and it's this, and it's like those kind of things really used to hurt me a lot. But I used to take that hurt and I used to turn it into power, and I used to take that negativity, and it used to drive me so much. It used to give me such amounts of like a deep well of immense amount of manipulated hurt into powering me to prove people wrong. Like, watch me. You think it's not possible? Watch me. I'm gonna turn every single one of you into a believer. And even if I don't turn you into a believer and a follower, I'll silence you. I'll silence the lambs. That's what I'll do. I'll turn the haters into followers, and I'll turn some of the followers into believers, and I'll turn some people just to silence them, to shut them up. And like, I'm like, this is real. I put my heart and soul and life and finances on the line to be able to help give back, help other people, inspire the world. And I will not be put off track or derailed by people that sit on the couch and pick fault at people trying to change the world and do something good for the world, because there are so many people that are the people that sit on the couch and they never ever do anything positive themselves. They never ever have done anything of substance in their life. They've never done anything to help other people, give back, try and positively impact on others or the world around them. But they will sit there and they will try and pick fault and try and pick apart anybody that's trying to do something different, that's trying to make an impact and do something good or do something that's never been done before. Because it's so much easier to point fault at someone than to actually do something yourself. And that's where you go back into one of my famous and favorite poems, which is about which is called The Critic, which is by Roosevelt, which is one of the most powerful poems that talks about it's so much easier to be the critic, to point fault at the guy in the arena who's marred with dust and blood and toil, that's actually trying, that's failing, that's erring, than to be able to actually that at least knows the taste of bitterness of victory or defeat, than actually sitting on the sideline, pointing fault about how he could have done it differently or better. And those are the people that I sort of just feel sad for them. And I feel bad and sad for them, because they're missing out on the positivity in life, and they're missing out on being able to get the gem, the elixir from what they're seeing in front of them, which is actually meant to give hope, courage, and inspiration, and empower people to be better, to do more, and to go out and have their own adventure and be like, have a great life. And they're so busy being negative in their own negative mental state that they become toxic within themselves, of trying to pick fault at things and break things down, instead of build things up and actually use it as a tool to be able to help inspire them, inspire other people around them, share the story, help be a part of it. Like, how cool is it for, like, as you even said, like, how many people that as soon as they realize, oh my God, this guy's actually, he's going to prove me wrong. He's going to prove everyone wrong. He's actually going to do it. When you flip your switch to go from, oh my God, this guy's going to die, it's crazy, to, oh my God, this guy's crazy, but this is incredible, I think he's actually going to make it. And suddenly you go from like this weird state of like, I'm not really sure about this guy, it's really what's the time, to suddenly being super like positive, inspired by it. And then like, whoa, then you're on board and you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And then you start sharing it and he's talking about it and this is incredible and look at this and look at that. And isn't it amazing to watch that shift change? And that's what they miss. They miss being part of this incredible journey that's there to that's free, to inspire people and lift people up and give back and change hundreds of thousands of lives and fix little kids' faces and pay for operations. I mean, it's like, how can you miss that? How can you miss the opportunity and then find the negativity in it? Like, how sad is your life that you look at incredible stories that are incredible for the world and incredibly impactful and turn them into something negative? Like, I worry and I feel sad for those people, because they're missing the greatest gifts in life, to be able to help them enjoy life and to be inspired and to actually hopefully get some sort of catalyst for themselves to be able to turn their life into something positive.
I totally agree. And I what I hear you saying too, it's almost, if they took the time to watch this interview, it would be fantastic, because it is the same amount of energy that you put into being negative, right? That's the same amount of energy. If you put that into believing in something and taking action in something, it's the same, except the difference is your whole life gets better.
Yes.
Like your whole life is more positive and uplifting and encouraging to others. If you just, instead of, looking at the negative and nitpicking it apart,
Yeah.
But, just transferring that over, guess what? You get a better life.
Yeah.
So,
and Ev, you're 100% right. And if you go into that state, it's actually quite fascinating because I've studied a lot of this stuff as well. So when you're in that negative space, all you do, your negativity feeds the negativity, and it becomes a never ending like feedback loop. And
exactly.
Like a great example of that is like when you're in a room and people, like you're in a room with a whole lot of people. If there's someone that's really, really positive and really like happy, upbeat, positive, and then there's someone who's really negative, and you'll find that everybody always gravitates to the positive, and people always move away from a negative. And you've got to look at those kind of situations and realize that when you are negative in your life, all you do is you attract negativity. And that feedback loop is just in that state. And it's a really dark, and I think when people are grown up and they're in that state, and they're in that state a lot, they don't realize how toxic it is and how they attract a lot of negative things in their life and in their world to that state. And that's people, relationships, consequences, situations, everything. And I think a lot of people don't realize when they're in that state that you can change that. It's just about changing your mental state and changing your mental attitude. And every time you think of finding a fault in something, you go, oh, I was just about to find a fault in that. I'm not going to find a fault in that. I'm going to try and see if I can find a positive in that. And all it is just making a conscious choice to change your feedback loop into something positive. Because when you are positive, you attract positivity. You attract positive things happening. You attract positive people hanging out with you. You have a positive aura around you. And when you have a positive energy and aura around you, you attract like-minded things, like-minded people, like-minded situations, like-minded opportunities. And that's incredible. And that just becomes a feedback loop that just attracts that. So it's like one of those things. It's the basic principles of a magnet, really. And you can apply that to everything in life. So when you know that, why would you choose to be that way? Because it's actually a lot easier for people to, and I think it's because it's a lot easier to be negative than it is to be positive. Being positive actually takes work and conscious decision-making process to get into that state and work at it constantly. It's a work in progress day by day. And the more you are in that state, the easier and the less work you have to take to do it, because it becomes a constant of who you are, and it becomes a characteristic of who you are as a human. But you have to work on it like everything else. We always got to constantly work on ourselves. And, anybody that's in a negative state and space, there are ways and tools to be able to get yourself out of it. And it's how you get yourself out of it and then remind yourself how to get into a positive state and then try and keep yourself in that state. And that's a work in progress too. And we all have difficult times. We all have dark times. But as long as we are mindful of that and we have the awareness that we know that when we're in that space, how to get out of it and then pull ourselves back into a more positive state. And when we know that when we're in a positive state, it attracts positivity, why would we want to stay in that negative state if we knew that?
I 100% agree with you. So that
there we
was
go.
A good answer, right? It's like
A
taking
little bit long.
It's like taking something that could affect you one way and using it to motivate you, right? I mean, that's what you just said. Like when you heard those naysayers, you just sort of turned it around for yourself, and that's possible with any situation in life, And I love that, and thank you for that wisdom. I feel like that's a really good place to sort of to wrap up and say thank you, Chris, for letting us be a part of just an exciting time in your life, with the launch of the film Last Known Coordinates, the coming of the book, which will be, is that still called All In?
Yeah, it'll be called All In. And that'll probably come out just after I do finish doing the Transpac Wing project, which will happen in May, June, July next year. So I'm going to try and see if I can do a book launch and book tour sort of after that, somewhere in September or October across the whole of America, with possibly even with my little craft with me, which will be pretty incredible. And then hopefully I'm going to auction off the craft at the end of the year, and some of the money will go to charity, and then some of that money will actually go back to the next project, which will be a yacht that I'm building in France for the next big project, which will hopefully unfold. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. Thanks for always being a great support, Ev, and the Stand Up Journal on everything that I've done. And you guys have always been super supportive and helpful, and always putting out a really positive and inspiring comments and inserts and blogs out there. And I think it's really inspiring watching you and how you've built the magazine and taken it over and built it up to become what it is. And I know that's been a really difficult and challenging journey in itself. And I think there are a lot of similar challenges that we faced on our journey. It's like building a company. It's the same sort of thing as building these projects, and the amount of time and energy and finances and hardship and struggle that you go through and trying to figure it out along the way. I think a lot of people don't see that, but I think yours is a great story of courage and resilience and perseverance as well. And take my hat off to you and all the incredible things that you've done. And thanks very much for supporting me. And I hope everyone out there really enjoyed the interview. And I hope you're really going to help keep on supporting Stand Up Journal and all the incredible things that they do. And hopefully I'm going to be doing a couple stand up paddleboard retreats and stuff later in the year, revive and inspire retreats, which will do some really inspiring 2 days and 3 day retreats on different lakes around the States, which will be pretty interesting, and do some talks and stuff in the evenings, workshops. And then the film, as you know, Last Note Coordinates, you can download on iTunes or on Vimeo. And you can book me as a speaker for companies or schools through chrisbertish.com. That's what I do. I speak for Google, NASA, Cisco, Salesforce, some of the biggest companies in the world. And hopefully I inspire people to believe in themselves, what's possible, and all about team and the power in team and the power of the start, and planning, preparation, having the courage to try, and achieving the seemingly impossible. So thank you for having me. Keep on going out there, having your own journey, having your own adventure. No matter the storms to face and the oceans to cross, you can do anything if you believe it and you take daily steps and actions, and you never, ever give up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, Ev. Have a good one.
Good job.